Is that how you pronounce it? I have always called it Spotrack.
I don't know. I've said spot rack, but it's one of those words that doesn't exist.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Continue.
Yeah. Spot rack, spot rack, spot rack, spot track, spot track. No matter what, they know I'm Jewish.
Dr. Oppenheimer. An honor. Mr. Strauss. It's pronounced Strauss. Oppenheimer, whatever way you say it, they know I'm Jewish. I'm president of Temple Emmanuel in Manhattan. Strauss is just a southern pronunciation. Anyway.
Hello, and welcome to Expected Own Goals. I am your host, Eric Morgan.
And I'm Evan Davis. We got Kieran today.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Kieran. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm very happy to get my NWSL hot takes out of the system, at least for a few weeks.
It feels like they've been building up inside of you for a little while.
You're just percolating.
Look, we're going to talk about it, but there's an infamous Kieran take that's been sitting in the ASA Slack that's just waiting to come out.
Oh, boy. But before we get there, we're going to pop around the league. Last weekend, I complained about a lack of goals. This weekend, the NWSL heard my complaints and shoved them right back in my face. Unfortunately, they haven't heard our consistent complaints about ACLs, Evan.
Yeah, Chicago's Ava Cook popped her ACL, and then maybe even more significantly, Bay FC's Alexis Loera has snapped her anterior cruciate ligament, which means that Bay FC now has to carry Joelle Anderson and Dorian Bailey for the rest of the season in the starting 11. So if things weren't bad enough already...
Yeah, I was about to say, thank God the Bay midfield isn't where the weakness was.
That feels like punching down.
No. I mean, it's just like critical. Alex Loera, it was such a critical piece to lose. It's the last thing Bay needed at this moment. If you could have picked a player less well-suited to go down for Bay, it's really hard to imagine a worse loss in terms of an individual that they could have lost and not had some decent cover. It's like Kundananji, Oshwala, Bodie are all having nice seasons. If you lost one of them, are all really good. You just have cover there. You just don't have cover for Alex Loera.
Yeah, there's no progression from deep anymore now on that team. We talked about it preseason. Like, this is one of the thinnest rosters with such an amazing amount of upside given the talent available. But if you lose one key piece, it's a house of cards. And things weren't going well already. So it's looking pretty dire, I think, for the rest of the season.
Yeah. Well, on a brighter note, we saw a bunch of really excellent crowds over the weekend. I believe that was the first time we'd ever had 4 games with 10K paid attendance.
On a single day, yeah.
On 420.
Yeah, on 420, yeah. Let them if you got them, kids. But, yeah, and then you throw in Angel City, and that makes 5 for the whole match week. And Seattle wasn't too far behind. They were at 9,600. So the league seems to be healthy.
Yeah, it was great. It was great to see Audi Field packed in DC. That game had wonderful atmosphere. It was great to see Louisville respond to their biggest ever crowd by just unloading a bunch of goals and talking about punching down a bunch of goals against a feeble Utah team who just clearly aren't trying hard enough.
Yeah, where's the humility? Where's the hard work? Where's the grit?
It also felt like Louisville's sort of been on the cusp of putting it all together. And it's easy to put it all together against Utah, I suppose. But it did feel like Louisville is starting to take those pieces, their 19 midfielders, and are starting to find solutions, which is a relief, especially if you enjoy the idea of Bevianis keeping her job.
They scored 5 goals. They'd never scored 5 goals before. They have their biggest ever goal difference, and they had their biggest ever crowd. And it was a legit XG performance.
It was a thumping.
It was a legitimate thumping. So that also will help keep the crowds motivated for the rest of the season, because that's a team that has very, very inconsistent attendances throughout the year. For so many reasons. They're usually bad, so there's not a lot of incentive. But when the docuseries is made in a year's time about the 2024 Racing Louisville squad, this is the moment. This is the catalyzing incident.
Speaking of a team that has struggled for goals, San Diego had a shocker this weekend.
Well, they struggled for goals, but usually the thing that gets them results was not present either against... Man, is Orlando going to make the playoffs? I think Orlando might make the playoffs.
I think Orlando's maybe good.
I think Orlando's like legitimately good. San Diego turned in their worst ever defensive performance. They gave up 2.6 non-penalty XG. From a Casey Stoney team, that is scandalous.
You can't even hide behind the team that played. You can't even be like, oh, we were missing so many players. It was like mostly a first choice team.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the other thing that is, compliment to Casey Stoney that it took into year 3 to get a deficit like this, whereas it took Amy Rodriguez 5 weeks to take multiple thumpings this bad.
You know what'll fix it? Trading the highest fee for a domestic transfer ever for a winger.
Oh my... Hold your horses, we will get there.
Sorry.
Because that is a deal we are going to talk about. Before that, we will just cover Houston's opponent on the weekend, the Portland Thorns, who
look great.
Yeah, who looked great. Is it the first sacking of the season? Or are we just calling it a reshuffling?
I think we have to know what he's getting paid now as technical director. If he's taking a pay cut, you can call it a sacking. If he got a pay bump, then it's a promotion. And of course, we're talking about the fact that head coach Mike Norris is now the technical director of the Portland Thorns, and his assistant Rob Gale is interim head coach until they decide to hire somebody permanent, whenever that may be.
And I think that it just comes down to probably Mike Norris not wanting to leave his vantage point to then have to be burdened with the possibility of coaching. He's like, I just love this view. And I'd rather not. Don't get me an iPad.
I guarantee you he gets better snacks up there than he would on the touchline.
Because he can eat the snacks in relative privacy. A thing I would not want to do on a touchline. Just a Slim Jim.
Can you imagine if at some point in the game the broadcast cuts to Mike Norris stuffing his face with like Ritz peanut butter crackers in the middle of the game?
Live your best life, Queen.
Do you think Karina LeBlanc just has like a bowl of poutine for him now in the technical box that he's just
possible.
Noshing on?
Let's keep with the Canadian theme here, because Rob Gale, of course, is intimately familiar with the Canadian setup. So as the resident Canadian on the broadcast, Kieran, what do you think of Rob Gale and what he has done in his career up to now?
I think Rob Gale's experience as a head coach is very limited. It's basically entirely boiled down to like a few youth national teams, boys youth national teams, that were mostly not successful, and Valor in the Canadian Premier League, which is the team based in Winnipeg, which have historically had attendances somewhere between 900 and 1,000 people.
Cool.
And they play in a CFL stadium with like 30,000 seats, so it's like very telling.
The Blue Bombers Stadium, great.
Yes, exactly. His first season, they were like truly horrific, maybe the worst team in CPL ever. And the second season, they were like a 0 expected goal difference team, kind of backed with a lot of investment. So it's like hard to say, did he do a good job? And then he was fired. And then he went to NYCFC, and now he's there. However, I have friends who like know him quite well, who rate him. So maybe he's learned a lot. He's not a super old guy, so like I think he's fairly open to learning. So I would not be shocked if he's better than Mike Norris.
Yeah, I mean, that's a low bar to clear. But at the best we can say about Rob Gale is we don't know.
I mean, he did start Christine Sinclair, and she did immediately score a goal. Earlier in the pod, we've talked about sort of the problem of Christine Sinclair. If there were one team you could probably get away starting Christine Sinclair against, it is the Houston Dash.
That has much more to do with why that didn't come to bite them in the ass the way it did in the opening weekend, because they were playing such a weak opponent.
I look at Gale's lineup, and it doesn't strike me as optimizing for Portland, but when you're playing Houston, does it matter? / will Fran Alonso be the first actual sacking of a manager this year?
That is an excellent question, because all of a sudden he has a slightly different lineup to be working with going forward, because as has been reported for just a couple of weeks now, Maria Sanchez requested a trade early in the season. When that news was reported, the Houston Dash said she signed a contract and therefore she is our player. Then she went public on Thursday saying, yes, I can publicly confirm that I did request a trade. I hope that all parties respect this request and accommodate it. And then about 24 hours later, Maria Sanchez was traded to the San Diego Wave for $500,000 in transfer money, plus a couple of international roster spots to boot. This is fucking bizarre on a number of levels. But what it ultimately means is that Maria Sanchez was not happy. Houston did not handle this well. And somehow Houston also fleeced San Diego in getting out from under Maria Sanchez's contract.
That's what's wild to me, is how much, given you never see a team who have their backs up against a wall with a trade request like this take a haul that is larger than you expect for this individual.
Yeah. And not just money, like now they have roster spots that they can go pick somebody else up maybe in the summer.
I think this is legitimately the worst transaction in the history of the league.
Buddy, that is saying something.
Listen, if you think about it from a purely mathematical perspective, they gave them $300K in allocation, $200K in transfer money. The 2 roster spots, which I think in NWSL international slots come out to something between $50 and $100K in funds. And then her salary is reportedly something like $500,000 a year. The cap is like, what is it, 1.8 million?
Cap's 2.375.
Okay, 2.375. That's like 40% of your salary cap is one player that isn't very good. That's crazy.
Truly, the high water mark for her in the league over a full season is 4 goals. The high water mark for her in non-penalty XG plus XAG is 0.31. This is not a player you should be paying, $500,000 to, given the current cap. The fact that San Diego, A, is willing to take this on, B, is willing to give up so much, and C, wants to provide Houston this get-out-of-jail-free card for a deal that makes no sense to begin with. I have no idea what San Diego's thinking. Can anyone want to play a little devil's advocate here?
From what I have heard, perplexingly, there was actually a lot of interest in trading for her.
The reason people love Maria Sanchez is that she had this really big reputation coming out of Tigres when she came back to the NWSL. And she had this one season in 2022 where she played rather well, but not necessarily at like MVP levels. And that has, I think, clouded the judgment of a lot of people because there's a lot of like raw technical skill there. I mean, she's very fast. She's a very good dribbler, not necessarily the most productive dribbler, but she has like the technical levels to do the job. I think that colors people's perceptions, not realizing that 2023 wasn't actually the outlier. That was just kind of her regressing to the mean. And I think based on how San Diego played against Orlando on Friday, maybe it's in Casey Stoney's head that she wants another type of creative player that could stretch defenses and not allow her offense to feel so stodgy. That's maybe at the best possible like devil's advocate position I can offer. But the retort is, well, you have Jaden Shaw. Just use Jaden Shaw properly. And you solve some of those problems for yourself. Why do you need to add Maria Sanchez to the mix? Especially for what you gave up. I mean, that's just incredible.
I think she is like the archetype of player that like output diverges from like popular perception. Mm-hmm. She is a flashy, pacey winger who dribbles lots, and like you watch her and she's an exciting player to watch. And the game ends and she has like 0.15 XG plus XA and like has largely kind of done nothing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like that.
You have to think that playing as a wingback in Fran Alonso's 3-4-3 was not something that she wanted to do. Didn't want to play that deep, didn't want to defend that much. But what do you think Casey Stoney's probably going to ask of you? Do you think she's going to ask you to play expansively and proactively and creatively in the way that you like to do? It's unlikely.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, like, Eric, I don't know what you think about this, but, like, maybe if I'm being a real optimist, like, San Diego, in theory, have a much better base to operate from than Houston, where, like, maybe she can get on the ball much higher. And so it's not, like, wing-back dribbles from your own third to the middle third. It's, like, stuff on the edge of the final third into the box. Maybe that's the optimist take, I think.
I hear all of that, and frankly, I agree with most of it, and I still don't think it justifies the actual cost, either of the contract or of taking on the... And that's the thing, like Evan, when we put together, we were talking at the end of last year and giving out awards, she didn't even make our long list for people to consider for either of our best 11s.
No.
She wasn't even the most effective attacker in Houston last year, which was a terrible offense.
Yeah.
Look, sometimes it really just is a change of scenery, and you have a firm grasp on the physical capabilities of a player and how they might work in your system, and you are right. It strikes me as rare. I don't have any situation where it comes immediately to mind. I guess Ashley Sanchez is kind of proving it, and we'll get there. A little bit about how a change of scenery and a change of system can really help you. That said, I don't think San Diego's the fit for Maria Sanchez, and I don't think this makes any sense for Jaden Shaw's progression.
No.
It strikes me as Houston got away with one. I was expecting essentially some team to take her on essentially on a free and just eat that contract. I wasn't expecting...
That's what I thought would happen. I thought Angel City would just eat her contract because they wanted her.
I don't think they have the cap space, even under those terms.
Clearly, given the next points we're going to talk about.
Let's link Houston and Angel City and talk about the other big trade deadline day events, which saw Angel City ship 2 players out, Amandine Henry to the Utah Royals for $75,000. And maybe more bafflingly, Paige Nielsen went to the Houston Dash for a sum total of $100,000.
Again, a move I really like for Houston. I think they had a great deadline, if we're being perfectly honest. They added somebody who's going to fit really nicely into a back three for as long as Fran Alonso has a job, which might not be a lot longer, but Paige Nielsen is a good player, and they got her for very little. And now they have a large chunk of capital to play with.
I think center back is the thinnest position in NWSL. And, like, if you can get... I would say Nielsen is, like, at worst...
She's solid.
She's a third choice center back for a good team at worst. If you can get that for $100,000, and it's not even a real $100,000, it's like 50 and 50 of like these weird transfer revenue spend. Unreal.
What the fuck is Angel City doing? You want to talk about the thinnest position in the league being center back? Well, this is a team that is pretty goddamn thin at that position, and Megan Reed is now going to be their starting center back going forward. And all you got back was $100,000?
I mean, we've talked about the baffling set of personnel decisions that Angel City continues to make. And this deadline day, I think, was yet another set of them where they got very little in cash for players who are both starters.
So I may have a little bit of insight on this. If anybody does not follow Taylor Vincent on Twitter or read her work at Spot Rack, which is now really putting some energy into reporting on transactions for the NWSL and salary stuff, you should check in with her. So follow Taylor's work either on Twitter or on spotrac.com. What she has suggested and what has been intimated to me off the record and on background is that they did not, and by they I mean President Julie Ehrman and General Manager Angela Hucles-Mangano, did not prepare for the possibility of Kristen Press coming off the SEI list, which means as an active roster member, that salary starts counting toward the salary cap. Either Kristen Press is coming to them saying, I am going to play at some point this year, or the training staff is saying that, or they feel like they have to do right by their marquee player. But they got caught with their pants down, and they had to scramble to free up some salary space in order to make sure that Press's contract doesn't trigger a cap hit whenever she does return later in the season. That's ridiculous and fits beautifully with the pattern of Angel City, who's engaging in free agent tampering and had to pay a fine for that. This is a front office that doesn't maybe know the rules and just thinks they can move fast and break things like a startup and everything will be fine. Now they were caught in a position where they had to give 2 of their most important defensive players away for pennies on the dollar.
I do sort of think that the Henry transfer is like fine. Like, I think from the perspective of like, you need her to play right now, given the constraints of your roster. But I think given her contract situation, like, I think getting off that is okay.
I also think that if this forces the hand to bring Rocky Rodriguez back in the midfield to play deeper, I think it's a net positive for Angel City as well. Because I think that this idea of playing Rocky Rodriguez at the 10 is just totally upsetting and strange to me. So if this forces the hand, because now that's your best and most viable deep midfielder, I don't hate this move.
I think that we have to worry about the fact that number 6 is going to be filled by some combination of Lelina Bett and Madison Hammond.
Yeah, and that's bad.
Even at Amandine Henry's age, that is a big, big decline.
Oh, yeah.
Both for playmaking and for acting as a shield for the center backs. That is a big, big problem, especially because your center back quality just dropped at the exact same time with Nielsen gone.
It does kind of feel like Kristen Press walked into the room and was like, hey guys, I'm coming back. And immediately they just took a gun and blew off 2 toes. And we're like, cool. Because that, like, there's, like, because because that's what it felt like.
If Kristen Press isn't back before August 1st, which is when the transfer and trade window opens again for the NWSL, if she doesn't come back before Aug 1, you got nothing for these trades.
Brain dead.
And then it's even worse if you don't use that $175K to buy a player from Europe in July or August, which they might not be able to do because $175K doesn't get you top talent out of Europe anymore.
No, not really. The other part of this that like all of these kind of looms behind all of these transfers is like we are kind of guessing at all of these numbers. Like we know vaguely what these players make, but we don't for all of them. Like I would love, and again, MLS does many things wrong, but like the salary transparency of MLS does make analyzing teams' cap situations much easier.
AmericanSoccerAnalysis.com even has a salary tool on its app, which it does not have for the NWSL for this very reason. The fact that we know Maria Sanchez's specific contract terms is the exception, it's not the rule. And it drives me crazy because we keep talking about how Angel City's cap space is basically none. That's all guesswork based on how they have behaved throughout this offseason, but we don't actually know for sure. So we should, thank you, Kieran, for bringing that up because we do need to be pretty transparent and honest about that piece. Maybe Angel City does have room to move with salary cap and they can go out and get a big player in the summer window, but I wouldn't bet on it.
Well, let's get to the team on the field that we are going to discuss this week. Angel City, now down 2 quality pieces, still managed a victory against North Carolina at home.
Managed being the operative word here. Because while the score was 2-1, the non-penalty XG split per ASA's model at the team level was 0.5 to 2.1.
You can win a game like that. It's just not likely. That said, it did feel like various amounts of luck that Angel City haven't received did get paid back yesterday.
I did tweet at one point that the soccer gods were really soccer godsing here, at least when it comes to Angel City's when it comes to Angel City's season as a whole, that's for damn sure. Whereas this is yet another game where North Carolina convincingly and overwhelmingly outplayed their opponent and they still lost the game, which is what happened when they played Utah 4 weeks ago.
So Evan, you were there.
I was.
You want to give us a sense of sort of the vibes of that game as you were in the stadium?
The first thing to say, which segues from the Paige Nielsen trade, is that there was a small contingent of Angel City supporters in the supporter section that were attempting to vocally and vociferously protest Nielsen's trade, which also made me kind of surprised how much of a fan favorite Nielsen was. I guess I didn't really clock that. And also, Nielsen's sister went on social media and talked about how this deal blindsided the family and they're devastated by it, which suggests that maybe she fell into the all-too-common trap of NWSL front offices trading players without their knowledge or consent or without any kind of heads up, which isn't great. The best sign I saw in this mix was, hey, owners, we're clearly not on the same page, P-A-I-G-E.
Oh, Jesus.
I like it.
I'm in. I love a pun.
If this is just an expression of a lot of pent-up rage, then go for it. I get it.
It feels more straw that broke the camel's back than, say, just Paige Nielsen. How would you not be upset about your team making these decisions?
It was a sellout crowd. I mean, the atmosphere was great, as it almost always is, no matter how well or how poorly the team plays. But as a result of these moves, Megan Reed was set up alongside Sarah Gordon in central defense. Lily Nabet was parked in the number 6 spot. What you were hoping for, Eric, came true kind of, in that Rocky Rodriguez spent most of the game in a more of a number 8 position. But was that because that was the tactical plan, or was that just because Claire Emsley was the only player that spent any amount of time consistently in the attacking half? Who's to say?
All right, let's talk through the game in sort of its progression, because we have sort of from the start North Carolina-ing.
This was maybe the most North Carolina attacking performance of all time.
It was possession as defense, then subtly possession, not so much as offense. North Carolina generated very little before the Emsley goal. I think 3 chances for, a tenth of an XG?
They don't come into their own really until that Lucy chance in the 37th.
This is the stuff that drives me insane about watching a Sean Nahas team. They are so clearly the better side, able to manage the game, and yet they're toothless in attack. And they were toothless in attack for those first 23 minutes. And all Angel City seemed to have was outlets to the wings and crosses to nobody until the goal. And the goal comes from the first interior run that is made and the first through ball that is slipped through, and a foul that probably is necessary to deny a goal scoring chance. And then Emsley just like, as Ariana put it, Claire Bensley bent it in with her left foot from the top of the box. And what had felt like a totally fruitless first half of the first half for Angel City sees them with a lead, which is a shocker. And then North Carolina actually start playing.
So I'm always curious with Nejas and with the Courage, like how much of that first 20 minutes being like so conservative is deliberate versus like them being toothless, right? Like, because I think it's a thing, like we all see, everybody talks about it, the Courage use possession primarily as a defensive tool. And I wonder sometimes if Nejas gets caught in like what is really like kind of a large global tactical trend of like safe, stable ball progression is the safest way to not get scored on. Let's like be very cautious and not shoot ourselves in the foot. And I just wonder sometimes like how much of that is him choosing to do that and how much of that is like the Courage maybe don't have they don't have that Dabinia player anymore who's like really going to unlock things. And I don't know how intentional it is, and I want it to be intentional because I think it's more interesting that way, but I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if they played like they did from minute 31 onward, if they played like that in every game, then you could say, yes, they're just trying to like work their opponent's soft spots until they can, find some sort of cutting edge. But that's not usually what happens. The way that they played in the final 60 minutes of this game was really quite impressive, and it was really quite impressive because you don't usually see that from a Sean Nejas side.
How many times, and this must have driven Sean Nejas insane, how many times does a team dominate possession, give away a goal on its first real chance available to the other side, and then when chasing the game, give away a goal on a counterattack? Because this is a script that to me is just so classically how a team with less talent beats a team with more talent and exacts a footballing in some sort of way. How am I wrong about that?
Well, before we get into how you may or may not be wrong about that, maybe this is a good time to throw to some audio of Becki Tweed after the game talking about this very issue, about where they knew they could find space to attack North Carolina. So let's throw to that clip.
Yeah, I think anytime you play North Carolina, they have a true identity. You know what they're going to try to do. They want to have the ball. They want to play in this fluid shape where there's always rotation. And with that, I think comes the defending transition piece for them. And we knew that we could hurt them in spaces where their fullbacks were potentially like out of position in the sense that they invert or they get really high. So just attacking that space in behind the fullbacks. And then we saw as the game opened up, they started to press us much higher and really starved our midfielders of any space. We couldn't play through the midfield, which actually opened up Scene 2 and the space in front of the back line. And I think, the ball going in higher and then picking up underneath and being able to attack them in the attacking third was something that really worked for us. I think on reflection, and again, I need to see it back, we should have played that a little bit more often. I think it took us a long time to figure out that space. And I think if we can figure those things out earlier, we're going to be a lot more dangerous.
So, yeah, I mean, she knew that defensive transition was where North Carolina was going to be weak. They were going to be pushed up really, really high, and because they were so set in their shape that all you got to do is play over it or play around it, and there will be space to work, which is how the counterattack that sets up Emsley's free kick goal happens. It's how Alyssa Thompson releases that through ball for Emsley's second goal. Angel City had, 3 legitimate chances throughout the whole game, maybe even 1 if you think about it, and it all comes from catching North Carolina out with this space. I mean, look at the passing network. Like, Ashley Sanchez played a lot of the game almost like as a number 9 with Monica Matsukubo sitting further back. Sanchez spent most of the game right in front of the box. Ryan Williams was in the attacking half for most of the day. And then there's this really, really large gap right in the center of the park where they were just kind of conceding space.
So one of the things that was really apparent to me And I think one of the really fun things about like talking about data is like you get to compare what you saw live with like here's what actually happened. Um, is that watching live, I was like, man, like Angel City are doing a really good job of forcing North Carolina to play around them. Like, yes, they're getting into the final third a lot, but it's always been wide areas. And then you look at the data and it's like, yes, that is absolutely true. Like, you look at all the final third entries. There's a really fun new account that's been running around.
At NWSL Stat Singular.
That's the one.
Yeah, Sebastian Bush is the guy who runs it. He's great.
It showed all the final third entries for both teams, and you can see they're all in wide areas. None of them are in the middle of the pitch. And normally you'd look at that and be like, oh, this is bad. Like, this is not an effective use of possession against a team that's defending very deep. And then you look at, like, okay, well, how often did they go from there into the box? They had 40 box touches. They had 30 box touches in the second half. And they only had 4 successful crosses. Like, this is not a team that was, like, getting wide, slinging crosses against a compact block, which is kind of what I expected watching live. But the data didn't play out that way at all. They did a really good job of breaking them down out wide and getting into the box into reasonable positions.
And that's absolutely intentional. We want to talk about like what's on purpose and what's not. Sean Nahas does not want this team to be a cross-happy unit.
They had the fewest crosses in the league last year, 31.
He wants them to do what really good attacking possession does, which is stretch your opponent by using wide channels and then getting those overloads to move the ball back into danger zones rather than just like try and hit it end line and then lump it and hope, which is also kind of how Angel City attacks, but you know, it's so and it's incredibly successful. Again, like Monica Matsukubo has that chance in the 47th minute that probably should have been scored, just rattles the far post. If that shot in the 56th isn't called offside, that is a gimme, you know, and points entirely to North Carolina's success in breaking Angel City down. Brianna Pinto, right at the start of stoppage time, it's actually kind of incredible if that ball doesn't find the back of the net. Like, they really were hitting Angel City where it hurt. And retrospectively, Angel City can talk all they want about how their plan came off, but they played with fire.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think that, to your point, Kieran, Angel City did know the script a little bit on North Carolina. And I think, they weren't like diving in to stop crosses. I think they sort of accepted. It's a question of whether they just allowed North Carolina in too deep. But North Carolina really struggled, even with the number of touches that they had in the box, to turn those touches into things that were actually valuable.
There's a stat that I tracked that's like roughly how many box shots you get per touch in the box. And like good teams get something like 1 shot for every 2 to 3 or 2 to 2.5 touches in the box. They had 12 box shots from 40 box touches, so 1 every 4.
Yeah.
And some of that is Angel City are defending very deep, so it's much harder to work that space for shots. But I do think there's something to, like, yes, 2.1 XG. I've seen, like, 2.5 on different models. Like, that's great. But given the level of field tilt they had, like, you probably actually want a little bit more than that.
It did feel like, certainly, while they ratcheted up the intensity, the only chance they really generate in the first half is that Lucy chance. And what a huge chance, and fans on it. And then the only really big chance in the second half is the Matsukubo chance until Emsley's goal that forces them to yet further commit to trying to score. I actually thought they were most impressive, not in that mid window between goals 1 and 2, but in that overloaded window past there where they were really chasing the game. And I wondered where that level of intensity was when down 1 goal. It felt like there wasn't the urgency quite there to like create the way they created after conceding a second time.
I think a really interesting way to think about this, and I'm curious what you guys think, is when we talk about teams who are playing defensive possession, right? Like, it comes from a place of like, let's not get caught out on the break. Like, let's try and avoid playing into that script of like, we're going to get hit on the counter. And one of the things I was most impressed with from this game is like, given the level of field tilt they had, they basically didn't get countered. Like, they get killed, they get scored on the goal. But if you think about the second goal, like, it's a heavy contested shot that's from outside the box that she has to score a ridiculous chip. And other than that, there was very, very little value in transition. even when Messiah Bright came on and you have like two legitimate pacey outlets going the other way. And so I was super, super impressed with defensively how well they were able to like get on top, turn the screws, and then keep it that way for so long. But I'm curious what, like, because you guys are on the other side, and Evan in the stadium, like, I feel like you catch these things in terms of rest defense a lot more without the camera. Like, is that something you saw as well?
I mean, I certainly think that plays out in Angel City's attack coming entirely from one side of the pitch, that they just completely abandoned the left side. Angel City has this habit of starting Claire Emsley and Alyssa Thompson on opposite wings, and then at some point in the first half they switch because they think maybe that will give opponents something else to think about and maybe seem a little bit unpredictable. But they're so predictable in doing it that I don't think it's actually that successful. So the primary weight of their attack comes from Sarah Gordon, Jasmine Spencer, and Emsley linking up on the right side. There was Ryan Williams and Narumi Mira just gave them absolutely no opportunities to try and work the ball through the left channel. Maybe this is a good time to talk also about what Alyssa Thompson is right now in her season and maybe more broadly in her career, because she touched the ball maybe 3 times in the box. I mean, that's garish. But she's also widely understood to be such a threat on the dribble that players are going to be mindful of not giving her space to run into. It kind of bears out, right? The one really free dribble that she got was the through ball that ended up being the Emsley chip. Everybody knows what Alyssa Thompson can do when she is seeing nothing but grass in front of her. So I think they did a really, really good job funneling Angel City to one side of the pitch and forcing them to try and continue to punch that down that side over and over again. And when Claire Emsley's primary move as a service provider is as a crosser, then that ends up becoming Angel City's sole offensive weapon, because Emsley's the only person who seems to be able to do anything in the final third the entire night.
I do find it fairly perplexing that the shape of their choice to break is Thompson dropping off to link and play people, rather than it being Emsley, who in theory, Emsley's not an amazing creative passer, but she's probably a better creative passer than Alyssa Thompson. And Alyssa Thompson is definitely faster than her.
I wrote about this for Backheeled last week, actually. This feels like it's a deliberate choice either by Thompson or by Tweed or by both, because they know that the book is out on Thompson and they are trying to develop more versatile elements to her game by having her be a link-up force and be a progressive passing force, which is an interesting idea, because then that just gives defenses another thing that they have to think about, which if they start expecting the pass, then game theory dictates she's going to be able to find space to move in on the dribble. And also being on different parts of the field means she might be able to find different kinds of seams than constantly barraging toward end line. But it isn't working, really. Thompson's passing numbers are better this year than they usually are, particularly from deeper spots of the field. But it's not as though their progression and their levels of creativity are starting to go up at the team level because Thompson is doing this. So it feels like, are you just trying to hammer a really beautiful round peg into a square hole?
Well, this is the thing. And so the other half of this that we can talk about after this is if you are going to play that way and that you are going to have the fast player drop to link things and have other players run behind, why are you starting LaRue and not Messiah Bright?
Well, this is the great sin of the whole season, I think, is the fact that Messiah Bright is not on the field at first whistle. I'm a little baffled by that, to be honest.
She's still relatively new to the squad, and what level of comfort Becki Tweed needs to feel with her understanding of the system before sort of letting her loose. I can understand through 5 weeks why we are frustrated by the lack of Messiah Bright, but I don't think that that's some sort of fixed point. I think that Bright will end up taking more and more minutes, particularly if she's more productive than Sydney Leroux, who is essentially absent from this game.
It's just an odd choice of meshing personnels. On Thompson though, I think one thing that's kind of important to caveat, what can be a very critical discussion of someone who came into the league with a lot of hype, is that like on one hand, yes, like I don't think she has produced to the level that is A, expected of her, or B, like kind of necessary for the amount of like usage she's been handed. Is that like she is 19 and like kind of the only predictor of like how good you are when you are 18 and 19 is like how many minutes do you play? Like that's kind of the number one predictor of how good your career goes is can you stay on the field at that age? So that's putting that aside. I don't love any choices to round out young players' games instead of making them really, really good at one thing. If you're not a great player, round out your game. Add a little bit of passing, a little bit of ball winning, whatever. But if you're like supposed to be the talismanic attacker, how about you be the best depth attacker in America before we talk about adding all these other things? Because like even if the book is out on how fast you are, like the book is out on Ashwala on how fast she is. She runs in behind. That's her thing. Nobody stops it. She's 29 and she still does the same thing. So like I think that's like again we talk about organizations valuing analytics and like the relative use of analytics in soccer is like knowing what is actually valuable to winning soccer games, and for strikers running in behind and getting shots in the box is infinitely more valuable than all of the linking you can ever do.
I think that she's suffering the dual problem of a team that doesn't know how to use her, and also I remember thinking when I started watching her at Angel City, it's like, oh, she has a single game plan that has worked throughout her youth career, which is to just dribble past people and to find spaces and create that way. If your game as a high schooler is to just dribble and beat people and score, and you can do that at the level Alyssa Thompson was doing that, it must be a real shock when you start playing with full grown ass women and every single one of them is as fast as you are. And you just sort of don't have that second plan available to you. She took so many touches in the box last season to generate so few shots. Talk about efficiency there. Like, she just was not... It just felt like she was really out of her depth, and there was very little in the way of other players around who knew how to play with her, and that still seems true. Again, she's 19. I'm not actually that stressed out about her, but I am stressed out about her situation.
So I want to piggyback off that because I think you brought up a really interesting point about like her dribbling as a skill set. So I was digging around in the Angel City G Plus and kind of looking at different players and see like what is the shape of the production of the different roles. And one thing you see is that Emsley has been largely productive in terms of XG plus XA. She's like top 15 in the league. Thompson is very, very low. She's like 1.1 XG plus XA through 500 minutes. However, the shape of their G plus is very similar. Emsley has like a lot more passing value because she takes set pieces, and Angel City have been actually quite productive on set pieces. But both of them have really low receiving and really low dribbling. And generally what that means, if you have a winger with low receiving, is that they're not running in behind. They are getting it to feet all the time. And so when you look at these two players, what it says to me, and when you watch the tape, you see this, they are not receiving the ball high enough that the trade-off on dribbling is worthwhile. If you receive the ball in the box and you're trying to take on fullbacks and like the downside is like maybe you win a penalty or you're getting into a cutback spot or a really good shot, it's totally worth the 50-50 of taking someone on. But when that is 40 yards from goal and the turnover is now a good transition the other way, and if you're successful, it's like, okay, you get an extra 7 yards on the field. That trade-off is like not very worthwhile in the eyes of the machine learning possession value model gods. But I think that's a really interesting tactical dilemma when you have these players who are like, if you were to say put Thompson and Emsley as the wingers of North Carolina, and they are constantly getting possessions with an advantage against a fullback in a wide area, how different does the shape of their production look?
You don't think Nejas would just tell them to drop deep and receive the ball?
I think it's unlikely.
Let's pivot here, because I think we all look at this game and saw North Carolina essentially doing something that should be effective a lot of the time and just not having it happen. It just didn't come off. And we can criticize to the degree to which it didn't come off or what they should have done differently. Like, we could nitpick that further, but I feel like we're going to be talking about North Carolina a fair amount this season because it strikes me as if they're going to be hanging around near the top of the table. What is the solve if you're Angel City right now, to sort of create a system, like with the personnel on hand, how are you lining up to put Emsley and Thompson in positions that actually allow them to achieve? Like, what is the 11? What is the system?
Pray that Maggie Doherty-Howard is still this good for the rest of the summer, which is not something that she's proved over the course of her career.
I don't have like specific tactical wants, but I would like to see a lot more Kennedy Fuller. She didn't really do anything in this game, so like it's probably a bad game to make this point, but like I'm pretty intrigued with her output so far. Like she's basically putting up the same numbers as Thompson, but from a much deeper spot most of the time. I think there's probably some creative attacking juice there from her.
Yeah, I mean, Kennedy Fuller's G+ is driven primarily by her receiving because she's been used as this extra runner in the box to come from deep, and it paid dividends in the first couple of games of the season. For nothing else, it would give her the opportunity to bed in and develop in the toughest environment she's ever played in. And maybe this is a situation where Angel City recognizes you develop the raw talent that you have rather than try and hammer the vets into some sort of shape that could pay off. Because again, Maggie Doherty-Howard is having a really, really strong season as the number 10, and a position she was not expected to play in the 11 before Rodriguez got hurt. Now that she and Rodriguez are going to play together, Rodriguez did move further back because Doherty-Howard has demonstrated, at least up to now, how much she can produce in those spots. But this is just not the player that she has been throughout the majority of her career. So you think that maybe some regression is going to come. And if that's the case, I don't have any other solutions because you can't play Hammond or Nabet too high up. Clarice LeBihan, for as good as she looked at the end of last season, is again not somebody you're going to get any level of consistency out of. There's nobody else. Like, the bench in this squad is really thin in these spots. It was thin going into the offseason. This was an area everyone knew Angel City had to bolster. And they kind of got lucky having Henri come back early from her loan and have Kennedy Fuller express some level of talent that could be fostered and developed as a starter. Beyond that, it's trouble. I feel that Angel City potentially is in trouble in that area of the field.
We have a really cool filter on the ASA website that you can filter G+ by locations of the pitch for different teams. So if you look at G+ just in both boxes and each of zone 14, so kind of like, what are you giving up in the most valuable areas of the pitch? What are you getting in the most valuable areas?
And this is at the team level you're talking about.
At the team level,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Angel City are 6th in G+ in those areas, but they're much closer to 2nd than they are to 7th. So they're kind of in a pack of teams with like Louisville and Washington, and like some of the other teams have been quite good so far. And generally, when we're talking about these possession value models, one of the things that we see is that midfield basically doesn't matter in possession value models because you're just so far from goal, it's very difficult to generate value there. And if you're picking a team and you have to choose being really good in midfield or being really good in both boxes, it's not the worst platform to start from is being really good in both boxes.
This is a storm that they can weather if Becki Tweed is comfortable with the idea about not having the ball, because she is one of the coaches who really wants to develop this team as a possession side. You're going to need ball-playing midfielders in order for that to happen.
That's not the pieces you got.
To this point, I actually want to throw to one more clip from Tweed where she talks about this very issue about trying to develop the team into something more versatile. Let's listen to that.
We have to become a team that doesn't have one way to do it. We have to have a way that when you get solved, you find another way, and you get solved and you find another way. And I think, that takes some trial and error. It really does. You're not going to be perfect straight away, and we still have moments to fix. But it's really, really important for us that, to put together complete performances, we have more than, one plan, 2 plans, 3 plans.
So yeah, maybe this is the start of them becoming more of a tactically flexible side rather than just boxing themselves in. If they feel like this worked against North Carolina, that this can be a card that they play and not have to constantly try and hold the ball and do a press and possess thing. To your point, Kieran, it might be the wise thing to do.
All right, let's flip and let's talk North Carolina, a team who've really sort of come out of the blocks and been quite impressive from the start of the season, as much as Sean Nahas frustrates me. What did you think of North Carolina's performance in this game?
Well, first I want to make a quick note. If you take out their performances against Houston and Utah, the first 2 games of the season, their non-penalty XG differential shrinks considerably.
Sure.
Because they've played Gotham, they've played Portland, and now they've played Angel City, all respectable teams, unlike Houston and Utah. They're playing in the aggregate against good teams so far, a little bit closer to average than maybe what the top line number would suggest for the first 5 games. But with that said, this is a game that really demonstrated what they do best and when they're doing it at a really, really high level. I wanted to talk about Ashley Sanchez for a minute because Alyssa Thompson was a player who we've reflected has gone in one direction since last year. Ashley Sanchez is going the other direction and is a player who seems to be really, really benefiting from a change in system. A role that is put her last night at times as the center forward rather than as the string puller, sitting underneath Monica Matsukubo. She looks incredibly dangerous. She looks like she has the freedom and the space and the opportunity to do what she does best, which is unlock low blocks. Without Caroline, North Carolina did not have someone with that level of technical savvy in those kinds of areas to make things happen. Tyler Lucy wasn't going to be that player. As good as Haley Hopkins bizarrely has been the first few games, she wasn't going to be that player either. So Sanchez seems to have become pretty good business from North Carolina. That trade seems to be really working out for them right now.
I think one of the things especially about that deal that she's maybe uniquely suited to the Courage is that they are so stable in terms of their ball progression methods that she almost doesn't have to contribute to ball progression at all. She doesn't have to be a between lines option. She doesn't have to hold the ball up. She doesn't have to even really make runs into the channel or anything.
She can just drive at center backs all day long.
Exactly. And she just gets to really, really focus on the strengths of her game, which is I am this weird tweener attacking midfielder forward who gets into the box and gets shots. And they have the system set up to do that.
She looks like the person that everyone is depending on in the final third for the creativity there, which solves the problem of how North Carolina is going to weather the Caroline absence. It sort of looks like that solution is just named Ashley Sanchez. And if they get Caroline back, they have the good kind of problems on their hands, where they have people who are super effective in the final third that can play with each other.
Yeah, and Nejas is also developing different progression options in the center of the park too, whereas, Denise O'Sullivan's never been a bad passer. She's a pretty good deep line playmaker. Her carrying tool is her defensive abilities. But now he's featured her more and more as the more advanced midfielder in that triangle than she maybe has ever played. And she's kind of acquitting herself pretty nicely as a string puller. And now you have to think about how Narumi is going to create triangles with Feli Rauch and Haley Hopkins on one wing, and you got to think about how Denise O'Sullivan's going to do it with Lucy and Ryan Williams on the other wing. And much like the way that they did with Angel City, you can't funnel North Carolina to one side of the pitch or the other. They now have enough people who are at a level of playmaking skill where they can kind of just put the ball wherever they want. When it can be this incisive, particularly in that last half hour, 40 minutes of this game, that's a scary proposition, especially when any of those passes then can release Sanchez into space or try to find Lucy making a late run into the box. That's pretty tasty.
I think one of the things you brought up there is what I've been most impressed with about the not being able to funnel them one way. When I think about the Courage often, one of the things that I've gotten kind of hung up on since Davinia has left is that they kind of feel like an uncreative team. They don't have that 10 or midfielder who's really going to unlock you on the ball.
They didn't have a 10 at all last year, basically.
And the wingers aren't we talk about Thompson and Emsley, they're not take you on, create on their own winger. But what the Courage have done an exceptional job of is that their occupation of spaces when they are circulating the ball on the edge of the final third is so good that they're not a circuit team. They're not this boring Italian team doing the same circuits over and over. But their occupation of they always have a player in the half space pinning that space between the fullback and the center back. They always have someone full width on the touchline in the final third to stretch that space to the fullback. They always have someone making the run in the seam so that if they get picked up, then the person in the half space is free. They just have really, really good occupation of spaces that it's very hard to keep them somewhere And if they want to stay there, you have to bring the numbers to defend it. And if you don't, they just break you down. And when you do bring the numbers, they're out through Sullivan or Narumi, and they're out the other way, and they're trying to break you down again before you can shift. And it's very prescribed, and I can understand why some people like might find them sometimes boring, but it is very like meticulous about like, no, we don't have the conditions set up on this swing yet. Like, we're gonna keep it here. And then like they hit their rotation on the fullback so that, oh, the fullback is the switch player and now the winger's wide and the 10 is high or whatever. That like, okay, now when the switch happens, we go. So it's very like, I don't know, coaches can be like that, but it is quite fun.
Well, and it's only boring if you can't create quality chances in the penalty box. And they did that yesterday, and were very unlucky not to score any of those chances. So this, again, I think is like the optimal kind of platonic version of what a Sean Nahas Courage team looks like. The question is, can they continue to do that consistently against strong defensive opposition going forward?
And I suppose the other question in my mind is, can they do this when the game is 0-0, as opposed to when the other team opts to bunker?
Yes, you wanted to talk about some game state stuff, and this is maybe the place to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, because we've seen them lose 2 games so far this season with some ridiculous XG numbers that have been, to a certain extent, is there a way in which North Carolina needs to develop some sort of counterpoint to the thing that is already working well to create dynamism that allows them to jump an opponent early or to settle back into this? Because this does strike me as possession that is much more effective defensively once you have a lead.
And to that point, like when they played Gotham and Portland earlier in the season, they didn't generate a lot of quality offense at all.
Because Angel City is not particularly effective defensively here, I don't think this is a particularly game-statey game. It's not like Angel City score and drop off and change anything. They were kind of inept with the ball to begin with, and then they remain inept with the ball, and then they get a counter-attacking chance and still remain inept with the ball, sort of for the entire length of this game. And North Carolina, Evan, I don't know if I think that they created a ton of really great chances, but they certainly created enough to win this game.
I don't know. Like, again, Lucy in the 37th, Monica in the 47th, Lucy again in the 73rd, and then the crazy box scramble at the beginning of stoppage time. Those are all big. I mean, again, by FBref's model, they had 5 shots with an XG above 0.15, which is sort of our quality chance threshold.
My contrarian take is that I don't think it matters. I think the reality is like they're good enough that they're going to come quite high in the regular season. Like they're going to have a home playoff game, I would say, is a probably fair marker for them. And I think when we're talking about knockout soccer, like one of the things that you see in tournament style play or single elimination or 2 legs is that advancing is much more about minimizing opponent XG than it is about maximizing your own. And I think given their stylistic choices, like they might go into the playoffs and play like legitimately the most horrible game you've ever watched, but they'll win 1-0 on like 0.8 to 0.1 XG. And that's the aim of the game eventually.
What you just said, Kieran, plays into my pet theory about possession, which is it's not difficult to win without the ball, but it's actually quite difficult to lose with the ball. Possession as defense, possession as risk minimization rather than opportunity maximization. With 8 playoff spots, that can be enough. And again, you hit the reset button once the tournament starts in November.
I hope it's been delightfully eye-opening for people coming to this league.
You know what else is delightfully eye-opening? Expected own goals.
Jesus, Evan.
And so we hope that you rate us, review us, follow us on the ASA feed or on our own feed. Please rate us 5 stars if you're going to rate us at all. Follow us on all social channels at XOwnGoals. That's the letter X own goals. If you think we have an own goal of such a degree like Kieran saying that Utah might be good, please email us. Please email us at expectedowngoals@gmail.com. That's the letter expectedowngoals@gmail.com.
Evan, we're like 3 performances away from owning Gotham #1 as a huge problem.
Completely agree.
Yeah, hey guys.
I do not like it when Kieran is proven right. And we are fast approaching that point, and I hate it.
I would like a retroactive own goal reversal, because I said I was curious what was going to happen when everybody was at the Olympics, and now they are playing games with this stupid tournament thing So now I get to be curious again.
Yes, you do get to be curious again. That is true. Yes. No, your own goal was just that, like, yes, we know that the teams were taking competitive time off during those
Yes, fair
7
enough.
weeks. But yeah, no, that tournament is very silly and very stupid, except for the like one game each team gets to play a Liga MX Femenil team. Anyway, Kieran, thanks so much for dropping in. It was great to see you.
I'll see you all in a few weeks.
Week 8, heat check. I know.
Yeah, when we truly heat check our stupid words like Kansas City. Sorry, Casey. I'm just looking at this preseason list and I'm terrified.
Yeah. But we'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.